on. Keep it on. Got to keep it on. Through the strength of your mind, you can be set free. You can know what's on your back. Search deep inside, and you will see. Time has come and
Could you speak more specifically to how your impact on the early development of Black theology?
Well, actually, in two major ways, or two significant ways, I should say. Well, first, in terms of the Black theologians that were doing that, responding to me. So, Vincent Harding in his writings, Archie Harding, and certainly James Cone referred to fundamental points I made about how we need to understand God in relationship to the struggle we were engaged in at that time. And I had also in the National Council of Negro Clergymen, which I asked to change the name to Black. They did eventually. But I had gone and laid out what I thought was some of the fundamental criteria by which we should judge a theology and by which we should do our work. And so I had said that if we had a God, he had to be with us historically. He has to be historically grounded in our own history, and that he should be in our own image and in our own interest. And that has become. Also, I said that theology has to have a culture basis to it. It can't be out in the air. And James Cone, for example, quoted that when he was saying that, and I said, black is our ultimate reality, right? He said that's his point of departure for his theology. And also, he quoted the idea that I said, man is only a man in a philosophy class. Otherwise, you know, Chinese making cultural revolution, black people engaged in struggle here, people eating watermelon and ice cream, talking abstract about their lives in various ways, right? So just the need for us to concretize, you know, what we're doing rather than just be abstract and above the world we live in. We have to be in the world, right? And of the world. And one of the things that I also have been very insistent on is that we have to sacralize black people, that there is no history more holy than ours, no people more sacred, no narrative more worthy of being taught and told. And we have to take that as, and no culture richer than us in revelation for who we are and how we ought to be. Du Bois said it early when he was talking about the field and function of a Negro college or black college. He said that you have to start with yourself. And when you start with yourself and you study yourself, then you understand different forms of humanity. And you then move from yourself to the rest of the world. But this is the foundation by which you understand yourself. And so therefore I developed as I went this fundamental point about multiculturalism and respect for all people, that each culture and people is a unique and equally valid and valuable way of being human in the world. And we miss something rich and beautiful if we don't give them that status. We can't keep worshiping at the altar of Europe. That's over. And people keep acting as if it's real. And one of the things I think black theologians have to do is begin to develop more concept generation. There's a poverty of concept generation in black theology as I see it now that speaks to the uniqueness and yet universality of the life lessons we have. See, every culture and every great achievement always has two aspects to it, a particular and a universal, right? It's particular in that it speaks the truth of the people who developed it and introduced it to the world. But it's universal in that it speaks to the best of what it means for, in our case, to be African, but also what it means to be human in the fullest sense. And so that's the beauty of great ideas and ideas that reach and embrace us in world-encompassing ways. And I think no one can doubt that black people have this kind of culture, both in this country and on the continent and throughout the diaspora. So we need to take advantage of it. And so we don't come to the table culturally naked and in need, but fully clothed in our own culture, speaking our own special culture truth, and making our own unique contribution to the subject before us.
Now, you grew up in a Christian household like most black folks, and you were influenced by Malcolm. When did you turn away from Abrahamic faith? Now, you grew up in a Christian household like most black folks, and you were influenced by Malcolm. When did you turn away from Abrahamic faith and started finding spiritual and ethical meaning in African culture?
Right. There's two experiences that shaped me, both college and meeting the Muslims, the messenger Malcolm. So in college, I began to see different ideas, but there was always this nagging suspicion that this Christianity, which whites claimed, and my mother and father was so in it. My father was a minister, so, I grew up not just being a Christian. I was living it, and I quoted. I took pride in memorizing Bible verses and saying them and reading for my mother, sitting down and reading for her. That was a great pride for her. And when I was away from the house, sending her letters and putting Bible verses in them. And she was always elevated by that. And I always did that. Even when I gave up the tradition, it was for her. And my love for her, which remains, and my father and respect for them, is I saw the beauty of what they taught me, even though I learned to reject its racialized version. And that was what I had to do. First, I just threw it all out. But then it dawned on me to go back. And actually, I'll get to this later, but it's Maulana Santi who asked me how could I have an African philosophy and didn't pay more attention to ethics and spirituality. And even though we had ethics, because we always talk values, we didn't stress spirituality, and I'd like to cover that in a minute. So anyhow, in college, I began to read all these criticisms of Christianity, and one of the most influential one, of course, was Bertrand Russell's criticism of it. But the key thing that changed is the rise of the Muslims who, for the first time ever, problematized history, problematized Christianity, not in the sense like, for example, just asking, shouldn't God be black? Because Bishop Henry McNeil Turner had already done that. But what they did was they raised the question of the nature of God, right? They raised the question of heaven and hell. They raised the question of how can we free ourselves using the racialized religion of white Christians. That white Christians had so racialized, Malcolm said, so identified Christianity with them that when they bragged on being Christian, they bragged on being white. And he was right, because what they would do is associate Christianity with white civilization and everybody else with paganism and heathenism and all those other names they had for us, right? Savage even. So the majority of the people of the world, Native Americans, Africans, Latinos, Asians, they were all like beyond the pale. So this seemed strange to me. So I decided that, well, this was not for me. So I first started just reading Hindu literature, because I didn't know that, and Asian literature, not just Hindu, but also Buddhist and other literature, because I didn't know that was a substantive African literature in a way. When I got it, I read some Egyptian, but I didn't put a lot on it because I didn't want to go into religion too far. But I did teach Yoruba in the 60s, Ifa tradition. And so that's how I finally gave it up. And then I had to look for another basis for my ethics and spirituality. Even though I didn't call it spirituality, we call it values, value grounding. We said values are everything. They're not just categories of importance and categories of priorities, but they're also categories of human possibility. Because what you put, what you think is important and what you deem important and what you make a priority dictates and determines your human possibilities, right? And so if you put more emphasis on song and dance than you do on study, that's one kind of possibility. But if you just study and don't dance, that's another possibility. So the question is a balance, And of course, later, I discovered in the ancient Egyptian text that the whole struggle is to master the heart and mind in a balanced way. In fact, Pebble says, one who can master the heart and mind has the equivalence of all the teachings. Mm-hmm. Because every virtue you want to achieve and every vice you want to avoid lies in your discipline, the heart and mind, so that you can direct your life toward good and expansive ends.
Mm-hmm. So what is the Nguzo Saba, and what conditions led you to develop Kwanzaa to express the Nguzo Saba?
Yeah. And it's good, I created Kwanzaa first, as you suggest, as a value system, a black value system. I had argued that the key crisis in black life is the culture crisis, that the key challenge is the culture challenge, that until we break the monopoly that the oppressor has on so many of our minds, liberation is not only impossible, it's unthinkable, because you can't conceive what you can't achieve. And so what I wanted to do was to search African cultures, ask myself, what is the social glue that holds them together, that gives them their grounding and foundation? And I decided it was their communal values, values that were beyond the vulgar individualism that I saw in American society. Not at the expense of the person, right? Never at the expense of the person, but a balance between the personal interest and the communal interest. And that's always a struggle. It's never really decided, because the moment you have a collectivity, the tendency is to, even unconsciously, pressure people to conform too much from some circle. It's just the nature of communal thing, just like individualism pushes you away from your own community. Well, communalism or communitarian can in fact envelop persons to a point where they don't develop the way they should. So I wanted a communitarian value system that allowed for this balance between the personal and the collective, a black value system that would contribute to the struggle. So I was at UCLA when the movement began to rise, and I left, right, so I could help build it. And I asked myself, what can I contribute, Mary McLeod Bethune said, knowledge is the prime need of the hour, but we would want to know what you're going to do with that knowledge. And she said, of course, we should discover the dawn and then share with the masses, with our children and the masses that need it most. And then also I'm reading Du Bois, and Du Bois, again, talking about education for black people, said that we can't just make money makers. We can't make people, because we can't just teach people career and to make money, because all we would have done is made money makers. What we need to do is not only teach people how to make a living, but also how to make a life. And that resonated with me. How do we make a life? And I said, we have to have values. We have to ground ourselves in values that create ethical community. And so I asked myself, what are these values, So I chose 7. And I chose 7 because of the spiritual significance. And I chose, of course, communitarian values. And I put unity first, because I believe that without unity, nothing could be achieved. And that if I'm going to talk about community, and if I'm going to talk about struggle and building a black, solid, united force, and a social force that is self-conscious and capable of struggling for its interests, then we need to talk about unity. And then I had to explain unity, that it's not total unity, but operational unity, unity in diversity, unity without conformity. And then I put faith last, Imani. Umoja first, unity, because without it, nothing could be achieved. Imani last, as a foundational principle, because without faith, you can't sustain the struggle. Many people have left. I've seen so many people leave in the 50 years that I've struggled and continue to struggle. All the people who sounded so strong, they were broken or became bitter. Many of them that, not necessarily belong to our organization, but many in the movement, you know, they have nothing left but bitter memories and an enemies list. They don't know how to relate to the struggle anymore, and they find different ways for not participating. But we've remained on the case for the race, as he said. At least he said that. On the case for the race, you know? It's trying to struggle for the people. It's our life. And in fact, as I said so many times, people ask me, how could I continue to go this long? It's because it's my life. I live it. It's not like I change it. It's not like, as I've said so many times, like a yellow wig you put on in the morning, take off at night. You know, it's something that is constantly with me. It's how I know myself. How would I know myself if I no longer do what I'm doing, right? I teach. I love teaching. If I don't teach, what do I do? You know, I love struggle. If I don't struggle, what do I do? I love keeping culture. If I don't do that, what would I do? I have to give up my 3 names. I am Maulana Karenga. I'm a master teacher. I'm a soldier. And I'm a keeper of the tradition. That's how I understand myself.